Welcome back, movie lovers. This is Michael Clayton once again, welcoming you to Seduced by Cinema. Today we are going to be talking about the feature film adaptation of the classic video game Sonic the Hedgehog. Now I gotta begin by saying video game adaptations to film are a little bit of a controversial topic in film because most of them are terrible. If you go through the history of like Super Mario Brothers, the Resident Evil films, there's not really a lot of great video game movies to pick from the bunch. About the only two that I've really found enjoyable myself have been Silent Hill several years ago, and last year Detective Pikachu, which actually was an enjoyable movie. I did have a lot of reluctance going into Sonic the Hedgehog. It had a first-time director, Jeff Fowler. He had done several short films prior to this, one of them nominated for an Academy Award, but this was his feature film debut, and this is a pretty ambitious project to pick for a first film debut, not because it's going to be Oscar material, but because it is adapting a very popular franchise. I was pleased to discover that while this film is not a phenomenal film, it is an enjoyable one. It's, very fun. The script was far more comical than I expected. I really had a couple of laughs in this movie, and that was something I did not anticipate. There's actually a practice within the world of film where they often hire stand-up comedians to do run-throughs on scripts to kind of punch up the jokes and make it a little bit more humorous and to really ensure that the comedy is going to be there. I get the impression this happened with this script. I don't have any kind of reference to guarantee that occurred, but the jokes are really punchy and they're really effective in this film, and it makes me think that a couple of other people did run-throughs just to make sure that the comedy was intact and was really sufficient. Because a lot of the humor here isn't just your typical juvenile humor that you find in a family movie like this. There is plenty of that as well, and not all of the jokes work, but there are some jokes that are adult in nature, not vulgar, but certainly a little bit headier, that do work really well and seem like a very odd fit for a family film like this based on a children's video game. It was a welcome addition to the movie, and it did add to one of my favorite qualities of the movie. Ben Schwartz does the voice of Sonic the Hedgehog, and throughout the movie it's about his falling to Earth and then teaming up with this human cop played by James Marsden. I like James Marsden as an actor. I was glad to see him getting some new work, and I have to say the chemistry between these two characters was believable. The Sonic animation, is sometimes not easy to buy in the film. I know that they did a lot of work last minute on this movie to change the entire design of Sonic for the film to be closer to the video game. So some of the CGI doesn't blend into the scene that well, in addition to the fact that he is blue, so it does make it a lot easier to notice the difference between the CGI and the live action. But the relationship between the James Marsden character and Ben Schwartz's Sonic is strengthened by the fact that they do have chemistry on screen, even though it's clearly a green screen, a lot of the scenes. I do buy into them being friends. I buy into the idea that they would have this camaraderie, and I buy into the relationship. Because of that, when there is peril later in the story, I am not completely invested, but I'm at least invested enough to go along for the movie. And I was never really bored in the movie, which is something that I find is common in a lot of films these days where there's some sort of lull, but in this one I did enjoy it throughout. Jim Carrey is in the film as Dr. Robotnik, and I have to say, if you're a fan of like the 90s Jim Carrey, the really zany, out there Jim Carrey, you are going to enjoy this movie because it is a return to form for that. Now, it is a little bit watered down because it is trying to be for a family-friendly audience, but it is certainly that really manic form of Jim Carrey that we've gone to know and expect, and it is interesting to see him being able to tap into that even like 20 years later after his heyday. Now, the film does have its share of weaknesses. Some of them I don't think the film could escape. For example, the storyline is very basic, and it's not that complex, and it's, very juvenile to a certain degree, but if you're a fan of the game, even if you're an ardent fan, you have to admit the storyline for Sonic was never high art. It was a very basic concept in which around gameplay could be built, And this is very true of the film. It's a very basic concept to kind of create these action sequences that Sonic can explore. The action sequences are very well done in this movie. They are what you would expect from a Sonic movie. There's a couple of wish fulfillment scenes you see, such as Sonic running up the side of a building or, causing a series of flames or even bursting into lightning when he really hits his high speeds. That stuff is fun to see. Even if you're not trying to be the most cynical viewer, it is cool to see those type of elements appear in the film. And I'll even say that there's a scene after the credits that has an Easter egg that if fans of the film are really hoping for something that'll kind of harken back to whatever made them love the game, they're going to be highly satisfied. The plot does drag at times in terms of not really knowing where it's wanting to go and wanting to more establish these characters. Sometimes that's for its benefit, sometimes for not. It maintains interest, but it does kind of get sidetracked at times. I also do have to say, like I mentioned before, I do know that they completely overhauled the CGI for this movie. And while it does look good, there are times that the blending of the CGI into the rest of the scenes is a little choppy. You can certainly tell that there's a CGI character, which we all can, but the seamless blending of it does seem like a little flat or seem a little too cut out. Now, I have to say, one of the things that I think the movie deserves a lot of credit for is they did go back and change it. If you've seen the original design that they had for Sonic, it was garbage. There's no other way to put it. It was garbage, and it really was a really bad sign of where the movie was going. To the studio's credit, they actually did listen to the concerns of the fans, and they made the proper changes. And one of the reasons I really wanted to go see this movie in theater was to support the fact that they did make these changes, and I wanted to show with my dollar that I was supporting the fact that they did listen to the public that is paying to go see this movie. Now, I don't think this should be a common practice in film. I think filmmakers should be able to experiment or try new things and not have to necessarily be at the whims of the public, because a lot of times they come out with something that the public did not expect that they would want, but they do. But what I do think is a lesson this movie could take away is I would love to see more filmmakers actually going to the public and actually speaking to them before they actually invest in a film like that. Now, if I had to give a rating to this movie, I would have to say it's a 6 out of 10. It's not the best film of the year. It's not even one of the top tier films of the year, but I have to say for a video game movie, 6 out of 10 is pretty high praise. This movie really does come up with some new ideas for a video game movie in terms of really adapting the material better than a lot of its counterparts. I think it should be praised for that, and I think video game movies are slowly moving towards this idea of being closer to the material that they are and actually presenting it in a way that's stimulating on screen. I'm hoping this will open the door for video games that do have an excellent plot that I think would make a good film. Assassin's Creed had a chance, they didn't really do well with it. BioShock, I think, would be a fantastic film. I'm hoping to see more of this, and I'm hoping it leads to a lot more creativity from the video game to film genre. I want to thank you again for watching Seduced by Cinema, and I hope you have a fantastic evening.